NBC's Raf Sanchez is covering this story from London. Also with us, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MSNBC political analyst. And Joel Rubin was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama and is currently author of the briefing book on Substack. Okay, Peter, how do you read the president's remarks today?
Well, look, obviously we know hasn't changed. This is exactly who Vladimir Putin is and has always been. He's been sending rockets into civilian areas of Ukraine now for years. What's happened is, of course, that Trump has discovered that Putin doesn't want peace. Trump told voters time and time again last year he could make peace in Ukraine so easily. It could happen in 24 hours. In fact, he would do it even before he took office, before his inauguration. Obviously, that hasn't happened. So since Trump doesn't want to have to acknowledge that that was wrong, that he didn't have the magical ability to stall this war with the snap of a finger, he has to explain it by saying, well, obviously Putin has changed. He's gone crazy. Look, the fact that he's feeling frustrated at Putin is, in fact, a turning point. This has been something we're seeing in the last few weeks where he is expressing more exasperation with Putin, more of a recognition, it seems, that Russia is not sitting there waiting to make peace, that Russia, in fact, was the aggressor in this war to begin with, something that the president hadn't acknowledged at first.
All of this does come, Raf, a week after the president said Ukraine and Russia would, quote, immediately start negotiations toward a ceasefire. What's happened on the ground that might change that calculation, or has it?
Yeah, Chris, what a difference a week makes, right? Last Monday, President Trump spent 2 hours on the phone with Vladimir Putin. He said it was an excellent discussion, and he came out of it saying that Ukraine and Russia were going to move immediately towards direct negotiations on a ceasefire. And a week on, none of that has happened. Instead, we have seen Russia unleashing some of the largest aerial bombardments on Ukraine since the beginning of the war over the weekend.
So, Joel, assuming the president now believes that maybe Putin isn't the man he thought he was, what does this mean for negotiations, and what should it mean for U.S. strategy going forward?
Yeah, Chris, it's great to be with you, and forgive me for chuckling a bit. It's as if Donald Trump finally got the memo. My God, did he just realize that Vladimir Putin is unjustifiably attacking Ukraine? It's kind of preposterous. I think that Vladimir Putin is playing Donald Trump for a fool and has him running in circles when it comes to the negotiation track. And there's only one direct way to stop this, and that is to get tough on Putin. That is for the United States to realign ourselves with our allies in NATO, to share intelligence in a way that is not threatened every other week if the president doesn't like what Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine says, to coordinate with the Ukrainian military, and to offer up supply. And that's the key thing that Roth mentioned. There needs to be clarity that we are going to continue to supply Ukraine's military indefinitely in order to put pressure back on Vladimir Putin. I fear that that is a bit of the squeeze that Putin is hoping for with these heavy bombardments and drone attacks, that maybe we'll just stop supplying Ukraine, then he'll get the advantage. But that all needs to make itself clear, and that's how we get this realigned and back onto a potential diplomatic path.
So, Peter, let me play some more from exactly what the president had to say about what he thinks happens now.
You mentioned you're unhappy with President Putin. You've talked before about putting more sanctions on Russia. Is that something you're considering more seriously?
Absolutely. He's killing a lot of people. I don't know what's wrong with him. What the hell happened to him, right? He's killing a lot of people. I'm not happy about that.
So you know Russia well. You worked in Moscow for years. First, Putin killing people isn't new. Do you think any of what the president is saying, even the threat of sanctions, will in any way change Putin's strategy going forward? What might be something that would get this headed in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I've covered Putin now for 25 years. He hasn't changed. This is exactly who he is. He's always killed people. It used to be in small numbers, and now in the last 3 years, it's been increasingly in larger numbers. And he sees that to the advantage of Russia. And he will only make a deal if he sees it to the advantage of Russia. I think to Joel's point, Putin's calculation here is that the United States won't, in fact, continue to ship arms to Ukraine. In fact, may even cut off intelligence help, which has been very critical to the Ukrainian Defense Force's ability to fend off their invaders. He is gambling that Trump gets tired of this. He gets impatient with this. And as Trump himself has said, walks away. If he walks away, does that mean he walks away from peace talks, or does he walk away from Ukraine altogether? Putin's gamble is he walks away from Ukraine altogether, and that Russia then has the ability to make much more significant gains on the battlefield, while Trump has decided he's not going to be involved anymore.
I mean, these attacks, Joel, as you know, on Ukraine are devastating. We saw the impact. We heard about children being killed, but you don't gain territory with missile strikes. In fact, the Washington Post put it this way today. Over the past year, Russia has taken only 0.6% of additional Ukrainian territory at the cost of 1,500 killed or wounded per day. That's according to current and former Western officials. The Wall Street Journal says Trump told European leaders he thinks Putin thinks he's winning. Is he?
It sure doesn't look like it on the ground, but what he is doing is terrorizing the Ukrainian people, to your point in this data. Look, Vladimir Putin can't take Ukraine militarily at this moment. But as we're discussing over time, if he gets the signals like he's been getting from President Trump and his team that we're not really backing Ukraine militarily, he may very well get there. And so now he's puncturing, he's pushing, he's terrorizing Ukraine civilians, trying to soften them up, trying to defeat their will. Clearly, they have strong will in Ukraine, and that's really what's made the difference in this war. But, this is a period where maybe he can't get the ground, but he can certainly harm the Ukrainian people's feelings and sentiment. And I think that's what we're witnessing right now.
And Peter, we barely mentioned the third person in all this. At the same time that Trump was admonishing Putin, the president also went after Volodymyr Zelensky, writing that everything out of his mouth causes trouble. That, of course, came after Zelensky put out a message insisting that America's silence only encourages Putin. Do you have a sense of, or what is the White House sense of the relationship between Trump and Zelensky right now?
Well, look, Trump doesn't like Zelensky. Let's be honest about that. That's always been the case. He has a long-time fixation on Ukraine that was fed by people around him.
Comments from President Zelensky talking about the silence on the part of the U.S. encouraging Putin. Some of the most direct remarks that he has made, not sitting perhaps well. What does this do to any potential talks?
Look, I think the reality is that the potential talks were talks. They weren't a reality and a real immediate path to a meaningful ceasefire. President Putin has been offered that. In fact, President Trump has told him over more than the past 2 months that he wants him to agree to an unconditional ceasefire the same way that Ukraine has. And Putin has punted that, has kicked the can down the road. But what we've witnessed this weekend is a very, very clear message coming from the Kremlin. You have the Kremlin spokesman today, not just accusing President Trump of emotional overload, but stating very, very clearly that President Putin makes decisions that are in Russia's national security and interest. And what that meant was, on Friday, despite the fact that there was underway 3 days of the biggest prisoner exchange so far, which incidentally Friday President Trump hinted that this may be the path to something much bigger, hinting that the path to peace may be open. What does President Putin do on Friday evening? A 250 missile and drone salvo into Ukraine, killing 13 people, then doubles down on that Saturday into Sunday, 367 missiles and drones. That's the biggest number ever since the war began. And then last night, after President Trump has spoken and criticizing Putin, calling him going crazy, Putin then launches 355 drones into Ukraine, which is the biggest drone attack so far since the war. So the message is very, very clear, and dare one say even consistent, coming from the Kremlin. That is, they're not engaging on the narrative for peace, not in a meaningful way. They're kicking around the edges of it, and in the meantime, kicking Ukraine. And if there's anywhere where there are emotions, they're very raw in Ukraine, particularly with the people who've fallen victim over this weekend. One woman who's sort of standing in the rubble of the remains of her property said, "I wish President Trump was here to see this." So it's not just President Zelensky hoping that President Trump really gets a clear-eyed view of what's happening in Ukraine. It's the Ukrainian citizens as well. And yes, they do want U.S. help, and there will be a hope that perhaps President Trump's comments now about Putin mark a significant change. I'm not sure if anyone's holding their breath in Ukraine, though.
So, in the wake of Russia's deadly aerial attack on Ukraine overnight, its largest since the war began, US President Donald Trump issued a strong rebuke of his Russian counterpart, saying Putin has gone absolutely crazy. And now the US president says he will absolutely consider sanctions. So, if he does that, how might additional sanctions change the direction of this war?
Well, let's see if he actually does that, because he's said that many times in the past and done nothing. It's also notable that in that statement that he also attacked Zelensky for having the nerve to be the victim of Russian aggression. And I think that I'm skeptical that Trump will actually put in sanctions. But if he did, then it would be secondary sanctions designed to undermine Russia's access to oil and energy supplies, to drive up, to reduce the cost of oil and energy supplies, undermine the Russian economy, undermine their ability to sustain a wartime economy, and that would be a positive step. But I am dubious that he'll actually do anything on this occasion.
So, Malcolm, what is the situation on the battlefield right now? How vulnerable is Ukraine, and how strong militarily is Russia right now?
Well, essentially what you're seeing is Russia making creeping, grinding progress in the central eastern area near Donbass, around Pokrovsk and Dnipro. They're slowly taking more territory, though at great cost in terms of lives lost. They've also got a force that they've built up in Belarus that potentially could be used to open up a second front towards Kharkiv. That if that happens, then that could undermine Ukraine's ability to sustain their forces and sustain their defense.
Humiliating for Trump. Putin humiliated Trump. And this isn't me celebrating that, because Putin's a monster, right? And what he's doing is monstrous. What he's done, some of what he's done, and is alleged to have done, is war crimes, right? It's not just he's waging a war that we disagree with. It's that even in the context of war, he's a violent crook. But he also humiliated Trump, because Trump has bent the knee to Putin so many times. And he's gone out on a limb for Putin so many times, essentially saying he's not as bad as people think, or I can make a deal with this guy because even if we disagree, he's a reasonable guy we just have disagreements and we just got to get into a room and get it done. Remember, Trump saying I can get a deal done in 24 hours was either Trump admitting he was just going to give Putin what he wanted, which is what we knew was really happening, or two, that he honestly believed in his brain that Putin was like a reasonable, logical person who, if you sat down with him, you could make a deal. As if, Biden didn't try that, which of course we know isn't the case. There was a logical, reasonable solution to this that didn't involve just rolling over. It would have been done before Trump got into office, which is what Trump realized when he said, me saying 24 hours is metaphorical. So Trump went on a whole limb that he could get a peace deal done with Putin. And then Putin humiliates him. And Trump is lashing out here, not because he gives a damn about Ukraine, but because he's humiliated. Because Putin has embarrassed him. He's like, dude, you're making me look bad. And so the only silver lining here is that this is a win for Zelensky, because it proves that Trump's strategy doesn't work. And it proves that crazy meeting they had a couple months ago where Trump yelled at him in the Oval Office, it shows why we needed to hear that. If that meeting remained secret, this never would have happened.